Over the last 30 years, there have been thousands of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects over the British Isles.
My first thoughts were, wow, what was that?
You think I'm bloody daft, but this is a UFO.
In the summer of 2008, reports of flying saucers and other crafts were capturing the headlines again. Over the years, numerous eyewitnesses, including military personnel, police officers and experienced airline pilots, have testified to seeing strange lights in the sky and other mysterious phenomena.
12 o'clock, very bright yellow object.
It was nothing like an airplane that I'd ever seen before.
It's the brightest light I've ever seen in my life.
We could offer no explanation.
Many of these UFO sightings remain unexplained to this day. But what or who were they? Could they really be evidence of extraterrestrial life?
I thought, what's that? I couldn't believe my eyes.
Tonight, we hear firsthand from those who witnessed them and examine the truth behind some of Britain's most celebrated UFO sightings. At the beginning of 1980, Todmorden was a little-known West Yorkshire mill town. But before the year's end, the town would be associated with one of the stranger stories in British UFO history.
It was something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there. If you think of a double-decker bus sideways, that's how big it was.
And he wasn't the sort of person that would suddenly say something, you know, that hadn't happened. So I believed him.
I felt quite safe in the police car. Now if somebody got out of it, I'd be bloody scared.
The story of a young Yorkshire police officer's sighting of an unidentified object became headline news.
I believe Alan Godfrey's telling the truth. If he's lying, he deserves an Oscar.
Almost 30 years later, his experience has become part of UFO folklore.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories. But the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered.
In 1980, Alan Godfrey had been a police officer in the Todmorden area for 6 years. On the night of the 28th of November, he claims to have witnessed something extraordinary.
We got radio messages from our control room that people were reporting seeing a small herd of cows roaming around a local council estate. And as I'm going up Burnley Road, I could see in the distance, about 500-600 yards up the road, something that had skidded. I thought it was a staff bus that had skidded across the road for some reason. Whatever it was, I decided to go and investigate. So I'm driving towards this object, and I got within about 20 yards, and there it was. An object, nuts and bolts, hovering above the road surface. It was shaped in a diamond shape, and the bottom flange was rotating. The top half appeared to be stationary. I didn't know what to do. I mean, what would you do? Well, if it were you, you'd probably ring the police up. But in my case, I'm already there, so I thought I'd radio our control room.
Alpha Foxtrot 203 to control.
Now with two radios, we've got a VHF, which is the car radio, and UHF, which is the personal radio. I tried both, and none of them had worked.
Come in, control.
It was eerily silent. That really does stick in my mind, that was really eerily silent. And for some reason, I don't know why, I picked my clipboard up and started to draw it. I made a quick sketch. So it's there. Rather than my head, it's there, it's black and white.
Although he'd made a sketch, Alan Godfrey's story would ultimately centre around what happened next.
Now it's black and white. And I'm at the other side of it, driving. Quick glance at mirror, it's not there. I got out of the car. The road surface was whirlpool dry, like a spinning object would make, you know, with all these leaves and branches and what have you. You could see an area of road surface that wasn't like the other. The others were wet, this was dry.
Unsure of what had happened to him, PC Godfrey drove straight back to the police station in Todmorden.
When Alan came into the police station, he was very agitated.
I says to him, you'll never guess what I've just seen, you know. You won't believe what I've just seen.
At first, you know, you think he's totally outrageous, you know, but I've no reason to doubt him. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and we know each other really well, and I've no reason to doubt what he said.
But the night still had one more surprise left. As Alan Godfrey ended his shift, he noticed something else he couldn't explain.
There was approximately 30-35 minutes missing that couldn't be accounted for. For me leaving the police station to coming back. To me, I'd only been away 15 minutes. Over I had, I'd been away approximately 45-50 minutes.
What Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced was strange enough, but he wasn't alone in witnessing unusual phenomena that night. On the night of the 28th of November 1980, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was driving through the Pennine town of Todmorden when he witnessed a strange object in the road.
It was something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there, in front of you. It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
PC Godfrey had no rational explanation for what he'd seen, or for what he discovered later.
I had this irritating itch on my foot. The boot on my left foot was split. If that's the sole of the, it was split that way. I've no idea why they were split, but when I took it off, I removed my sock, and it was on the instep of my foot, and it was a round circle like that, red. And it was very, very itchy. It wasn't sore, but it was very, very itchy.
At work the following day, Alan Godfrey received some surprising news. He hadn't been the only officer who claimed to have seen something strange the previous night.
I came on duty, and there was an inspector waiting to see me. I went into the inspector's office, and he then informed me that I wasn't alone, that 3 police officers in Halifax, in fact, had some sort of an encounter the same night. And he was putting a report together, and he wanted a statement off me. Coming out the inspector's office thinking, yeah, right on.
12 miles from Todmorden, on the moors above Halifax, PC's John Porter, Howard Turnpenny and Julie Baxter had been looking for stolen motorbikes. What they witnessed compelled them to make an official report.
We parked up, got out, walked down over the fields towards the quarries, and we'd nearly reached the quarries, and then something, nothing verbally, but something told us to turn. And we turned and just stood. And in the sky was a very cold, and I would describe it as a cold steel blue light. Not flashing, but pulsating. And the hairs on my arms and my neck just stood up. I cannot tell you, in all honesty, how big this thing was, because there was no definite shape to it other than a pulsating steel blue ball. But wherever it went, it was very, very fast. As fast as I'm moving my hand now. A second, a second, a second, a second. And that's how fast it moved, with no noise.
Whiskey Delta 40 to Halifax Control.
Tried to speak to Halifax on the radio. Nothing. Absolutely dead. I wasn't frightened, I was intrigued as to what this was.
But for WPC Julie Baxter, the experience proved unsettling.
Julie was scared. There's no doubt about it. She made her feelings very plain. Scared. Howard was like me. He wanted to know what it was. He wanted to see this thing. And for no known reason, it shot off in a big overhead arc towards Todmorden. Whatever it was not of... I can't explain whatever of our making. It was something completely alien to my understanding.
And the night was getting even stranger. 2 traffic officers on the moors near Littleborough, 12 miles from both Alan Godfrey and the Halifax patrol, reported seeing a bright pulsating sphere hovering between 2 electricity pylons before it sped off over the hills. In all, 6 separate police officers had witnessed strange phenomena that night. But it was Alan Godfrey's story which caught the attention of both the local press and UFO investigators, many of whom descended on Todmorden in the wake of the sighting. In 1980, Jenny Randalls headed British UFO investigation group Bufora. She was born near Todmorden and has written about British UFO sightings for over 35 years.
The Alan Godfrey experience, when it happened, came at the culmination of a whole series of events during the preceding 3 or 4 months that had been occurring in and around that area. They've been getting stranger and stranger.
The Pennines are the backbone of the United Kingdom. The area stretches from the Scottish borders to the Derbyshire Peaks, a distance of 250 miles. Throughout the 1970s, there have been dozens of reports of objects in the sky over Yorkshire and Lancashire. So numerous were the sightings, the area earned itself the name UFO Alley. John Sheard was a Yorkshire-based journalist reporting for both the local and national press.
This was a time when the whole nation was obsessed with UFO stories. We had reports almost every day up here, particularly in the Pennines, but also throughout the country and in fact throughout the world.
The late 1970s and early 80s were the heyday of UFO mania. The release of films like Star Wars and Close Encounters coincided with the doubling of reports of UFO sightings in Britain. For the time being, news of Alan Godfrey's close encounter had stayed within Todmorden, but it hadn't escaped the attentions of a group of UFO investigators led by Jenny Randalls.
When I first met Alan, he struck me immediately as being a very typical, no-nonsense Yorkshire bobby. He would not have reported something like this unless he was absolutely sure in his own mind that it was real.
Although there was little physical evidence to support his claims, Alan Godfrey did have a damaged boot.
There was a split across the bottom of his boot. There's no question at all that that happened because we were able to immediately photograph it and it was real.
There was also the sketch made at the time of the sighting.
You just have to try and make a value judgment when you put all the evidence together, what you believe about the credibility of the witness, what the sincerity of the witness's story is, how it holds together again and again over the years.
But for Andy Roberts, who has researched hundreds of British UFO sightings, the origin of what PC Godfrey witnessed is relatively straightforward.
My personal belief is that he went into some form of altered state of consciousness, whether you call it a trance or something like that. Something triggered that. In his narratives, when he's described what he saw, he always says when he was driving up to it, he thought it was a bus. Now, it's possible that was the point when he slipped into this altered state of consciousness. When he got near it, he was seeing it as a UFO. Interestingly, he describes it as having 2 rows of windows, quite like a bus, actually. And it was on a main road near a bus stop. So it's possible he saw a bus delivering mill workers or picking mill workers up, and in his altered state of consciousness, it had transformed into a UFO.
This object I saw was hovering off the ground, had no wheels. It was of a metallic colour and it had black panelling and dark windows. And it certainly wasn't a bus. I know the difference between a bus and what I saw that night.
And what of the strange lights witnessed by police officers John Porter, Julie Baxter and Howard Turnpenny just minutes before Alan Godfrey's encounter? Could they have a perfectly rational, scientific explanation? Dr. Ian Griffin worked for NASA on the Hubble telescope project for a decade before returning to the UK to carry out research into the movement of asteroids. He now watches the night skies from his home observatory in Todmorden.
My view is that nearly every UFO that has ever been seen has some kind of explanation, and it's probably because people don't really understand what they're looking at that they just call it a UFO. The planet Venus is often mistaken for a UFO. This is because it's very bright and it's very close to the sun in the sky. So very often, if you don't know what you're looking at and you see this stonkingly bright light beaming towards you, you think, what on earth is that? Meteors are sometimes mistaken for UFOs as well, caused by a very fast-moving rock entering the Earth's atmosphere high up. As the rock moves through the atmosphere, it ionises it and causes the gas atoms to glow in different colours. The colours can be green, they can be blue, and sometimes they can even be an orangey red colour.
There are other phenomena which may have existed for as long as the Pennines themselves, and which stem from more natural causes. Could these be the reason for the many sightings in the area, including those of Alan Godfrey and the other police officers in 1980? Dr. David Clarke undertook a major study of the area, known as Project Pennine. It described naturally occurring phenomena that ranged from glowing hillsides to bizarre balls of light.
It's known that lights have been seen and reported by people following major earthquakes and earth tremors around the world. So we were interested in checking out whether similar correlations could be made with the lights that had been seen on a regular basis in the Pennines of northern England. Basically, you've got underground huge rock movements going on and rocks crushing against each other and electrons escaping from that movement. People have described seeing these light forms as following valleys or appearing above electricity pylons or even apparently pacing cars. But what may be happening here is that these lights are actually following fault lines or magnetic variations in the local area, and that those movements are interpreted by people who see them as being intelligent, as if it's a piloted craft of some description.
In November 1980, PC John Porter and his fellow officers had reported seeing a bright object moving at incredibly high speed. Could it have been a naturally occurring light, or something man-made?
Aircraft can actually cause UFO sightings too. Oftentimes they'll have lights that flash under the wings, and viewed from certain angles they can appear to be coming straight towards you or whizzing across the sky relatively quickly. So it's not unknown for an aircraft to cause a UFO sighting.
We've all seen aircraft in the sky at night. I've been on nights many years as a police officer. I've seen all sorts moving in the sky. But on this occasion, whatever it was not an aircraft. It was not. There's no way it was an aircraft. Moving too fast and no noise.
Air traffic records, both civilian and military, revealed that there were no flights in the area at the time. Routinely, official police reports of UFO sightings would be passed to the Ministry of Defence. As part of the Freedom of Information Act, they've now been released. Dr. David Clarke has been researching official reports into UFO sightings for over 20 years.
When the Ministry of Defence files on UFOs from 1980 were opened, I went to the National Archives and immediately went looking for any mention of the sightings in Todmorden in 1980. And straight away I found a copy of the report by the police officers from Halifax, PC John Porter and his colleagues, who'd seen a bright blue ball of light in the sky. But there was absolutely no trace of the report that was made by Alan Godfrey the same night, about 30 minutes later. Maybe they just thought that his sighting was a bit too weird and a bit too disturbing, you know, to pass it on to the ministry.
But Alan Godfrey and John Porter were not the first police officers to have made an official report of a UFO sighting. Over the last 3 decades, police officers have contributed to a large proportion of British UFO reports. Gary Heseltine runs a database of UFO sightings made by both serving and retired police officers.
It's my belief that police officer testimony is of a very high calibre. There is no reason to think that these officers are mistaken because of their training, and I believe that police officer testimony should be regarded very highly in the world of the way we treat UFOs.
Police officers do see quite a lot of UFOs, and that's because they spend an awful lot of time out at night, often by themselves, often in remote areas like up on moors, industrial estates, places where there are not much ground light. You can see things in the sky. So anything that's up there, explicable or inexplicable, will be seen by police officers.
Between 1970 and 2000 alone, there were more than 700 UFO sightings made by serving police officers.
Clearly, police officers aren't going to make an official report about something they've seen in the sky in a frivolous way. It's not something that they would do lightly, because it has all kinds of impacts upon their career and whether they're taken seriously or not.
15th of August 1975, 2 uniformed police officers observed a bright lighted UFO heading in the direction of Hayward. A uniformed officer saw a huge UFO. 2 on-duty uniformed police officers, including a Chief Superintendent Hobson, were en route. 2:15 hours, Crofton, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. PC Patrick Tunney was checking on a couple of shops during the early hours of a winter's morning when he suddenly noticed 3 green lights approaching from around a mile distant.
Wakefield lies on the very edge of the Pennines, 30 miles from Todmorden. At the time of his sighting in 1976, PC Patrick Tunney was a well-respected police officer with over 20 years' experience.
I thought at first it was an helicopter having trouble, and we were looking at it. I thought, there's no noise, no engine noise, nothing. Just these 3 lights drifting towards me at about, say, between 100 and 150 feet high. The next minute, it didn't slow down, it didn't increase, and suddenly it turned to its left, and then it accelerated at a speed I've never seen it go that fast in my life. All it was a streak of light, and that was it, gone.
Could what PC Tunney saw have been an aircraft, meteor, or even a naturally occurring ball of light? And could any of these account for what Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced in November 1980? Whatever the explanation, within a few months, Alan Godfrey's story would take a much more bizarre turn. After police officer Alan Godfrey reported an encounter with a strange object in West Yorkshire in 1980, some researchers claimed it to be a landmark in British UFO history.
After Alan Godfrey's experience had happened, we were immediately aware that this had cemented the importance of the Pennine area as the hotspot for UFO activity in Britain, and in fact probably the most active location for UFO encounters anywhere in Europe.
18 months before Alan Godfrey's sighting, mysterious bright orange lights had been reported speeding across the night skies of Lancashire. At 2 a.m. on the morning of February the 24th, 1979, Mike Sachs was at home in the village of Stacksteads, getting ready for bed.
All of a sudden, the room lit. The light was moving. I rushed to the window to be confronted with this huge ovoid, about 8-10 foot across, light, all diffused around the edges. It was pulsing, brilliant to intense, very orangey white. There was no sound. I remember that distinctly. We were in awe at this. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It slowly descended out of sight into the quarry. It went through my mind, they do exist. These things do exist.
And Mike Sachs wasn't the only witness to the mysterious object. Local farmer Alf Kime, then 19, was out working with another farmhand when he too saw something strange in the sky.
We thought we were a shooting star flying down, and this building blocked it, so we shot past the building to see it. Like amazing, really, because it was the size of 2 double-decker buses.
and it was sort of like spinning round, like changing colours, a lot of orange. And it went right across the skyline, right over the valley then, right over the valley. And it went over, over top of houses, right over to quarry. And I thought, somebody must see that. Even though it were late, I thought somebody must see it. We can't be the only ones to see this.
I immediately phoned Baker Police, reported what I'd seen, and they said, right. He said, well, 2 of our police officers have also phoned in. They were parked just below the quarry, and they reported it. I phoned my brother Raymond. I went up for him. We came back to the quarry where the Panda car was still parked there. And I said, did you see it? And he said, see it? We thought it were coming down on our blooming heads.
Yeah, there you go.
So we decided then to go up to the quarry. Now the police officers went up with us. But there was nothing to be seen.
By 3 a.m, Alf Kime had arrived home.
When we got back that night, my dad said, is everything all right? The cow's all right? And I said, yeah, everything's perfect. I said, but we've seen a flying saucer or something to that description. And he said, don't be somebody daft. What have you been smoking? And obviously he was laughing to himself. And he said, have you been drinking? And Mike shouted out, no, he said, we've actually seen it. We've seen some of it anyway. He said, all right, I'll see you in the morning then.
That night, between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m, there were a dozen separate sightings reported throughout Lancashire and as far west as Merseyside. The reports varied from fiercely bright orange orbs to the oval-shaped craft seen by Mike Sachs and Alf Kime.
The following week, when it's out in local free press, you didn't feel as daft as really telling, because we told this story and you could see people didn't believe you when you were telling it because, I don't think I'd believe it myself really.
If the oval-shaped craft seemed inexplicable, what were the bright orange lights seen shooting across the sky that night? Astronomer Dr. Ian Griffin may have one explanation.
Since the dawn of the space age, several thousand objects have been launched into space. And the re-entry of a satellite can cause a bright flash of light in the sky. And certainly big satellites, for example Skylab in the late 1970s or the Mir station in the 1990s, when they entered the Earth's atmosphere, they looked like tremendous fireballs with bits breaking off. So oftentimes, yes, space junk can cause UFO sightings.
For many skeptics, the explanation for the sightings is even more straightforward. The Pennines has 2 busy civilian airports situated at its edge.
There was a huge explosion of air travel in the 70s and 80s, and that led to the expansion of Manchester Airport, of Leeds Bradford Airport and international aeroplanes. Now, the Pennines, quite wild, it's very dark at night, and if you see an aircraft in the sky through unusual weather conditions or coming into land or taking off, its beams, its light configuration can appear very, very strange. And I think that's largely been the result of why there have been so many UFO sightings over the Pennines from the 1970s onwards.
When it comes to UFO sightings over the Pennines, or anywhere else for that matter, we can readily explain away 99% more as mistaken identity. But it leaves that niggling little number every time that no matter how much research, no matter how much you try, you can't get rid of these particular cases. And after a lot of legwork, they still remain unexplained.
There was another possible explanation, that the lights in the sky being witnessed that night were connected with some secret Cold War military operation. After some of his constituents had reported seeing the lights, the MP for Ormskirk even raised the question in Parliament. On the 12th of June 1979, the Ministry of Defence issued a statement. It said that a US Air Force exercise had taken place between the 21st and 24th of February, during which fighter aircraft had been flying at very low levels throughout the British Isles. Were both Alf Kime and Mike Sachs simply witnesses to a routine military manoeuvre?
We get many aircraft flying over the valley, all different shapes and sizes, air cargo, passenger, military. This was totally unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I can only conclude, and I don't say this lightly, it is extraterrestrial.
We can never rule out military technology, but I think in this case it looks as if something genuinely unidentified was present in the Pennines that night.
Whatever the source of the strange lights seen over Lancashire, PC Alan Godfrey's experience continued to fascinate the UFO community. After Alan Godfrey's sighting in Todmorden, he claimed to have lost some 30 minutes in time. The only physical evidence of his encounter, a damaged boot and a sketch he'd made at the time. In an attempt to find out more, UFO investigators suggested a radical idea.
And they contacted me and asked me, would I be willing to go under hypnotic regression? I declined straight away. I wasn't sure, you know. I thought, what is hypnotic regression? The only hypnosis I'd ever seen was on television, on a stage, you know, where they make fun of you.
Eventually, Alan Godfrey was persuaded to undergo hypnosis, which was conducted by two psychiatrists, Dr. Jaffe and Professor Blair.
They wouldn't tell either of the psychiatrists what the subject matter was. They would only tell them that it was a policeman who they were going to try to regress to a certain time on a certain date to an incident that may or may not have happened.
Mike Sachs, whose interest in UFOs had been sparked by his own experiences the previous year, was present at the sessions.
The atmosphere in the room was absolutely electric as Alan is relating this series of events. All of a sudden, and under hypnosis, he goes and covers his eyes. Then somehow he's floating and he's taken into this room.
I have no recollection whatsoever what went on during that hypnotic regression.
Under hypnosis, Alan Godfrey's claims grew more bizarre. Not only had he witnessed a UFO, he'd also come into contact with alien beings. In UFO terminology, he had been abducted.
We were actually present at possibly one of the first abduction cases that has happened in the UK.
Whatever Alan Godfrey had experienced in November 1980, and whatever had happened to the missing 30 minutes, the latest revelations seem scarcely credible.
UFO abductions, very big in America, not so big in Britain. A handful of people allegedly being abducted by UFOs. So when you get a policeman seeing a UFO, later coming out under hypnosis with the story he was abducted, you've got something that's quite solid there, and people have latched onto it as being, you know, a real event.
I'm asking myself, did that really happen? No, I couldn't have done. I don't believe it. But why am I saying it?
Psychologist Chris French has conducted several studies in the area of so-called paranormal experiences.
There are a number of different factors which seem to play a role in people reporting that they've had an alien abduction experience. Very often there is some initial triggering event, like, say, an episode of sleep paralysis or missing time, that leads people to believe they may have been abducted by aliens. What's probably happening is that they are getting confused between things that are happening in here and things that are happening in external reality. And basically, as a result, they're having sometimes hallucinatory experiences, sometimes false memories, but that's leading them to believe that they've had these alien encounters.
But it wasn't just Alan Godfrey's supposed abduction that intrigued ufologists. The investigators also discovered a connection to another unsolved local mystery, one they believed could have extraterrestrial origins. 6 months before his UFO sighting, Alan Godfrey and colleague Malcolm Agley had received a call about a body found at a local coal yard.
He received a radio message that found a body at Todmorden railway station, so I attended with PC Alan Godfrey.
Well, someone instinctively tells you there's something not right. You know, you come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like, but you do. He was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There's no disturbance of the call, you know, to say how he got there. We just can't explain it at all.
And it was being treated as a crime scene. I think everybody at that stage thought it was a crime. That's how obvious it was. Why would a man climb a stack of coal, lie down on his back on top and die?
The body was that of a Polish émigré named Zygmunt Adamski, a former miner who'd moved to the UK after the Second World War and had settled in Wakefield, 20 miles from where he was found.
To me, I don't think he died there. I think he'd been put there. It looked to me as if he had anyway.
The evidence was inconclusive.
You'd expect if somebody had been lying on the belly or climbed up the coal, it'd be covered in coal dust. It'd been raining, it'd stick to him like glue. There was no visual coal on him, on the front of him, anywhere. Either on his face or anything. And he had these black marks that transpired to be burn marks round the back of the head. And there was one at the nape of the neck here, like an open wound, like a blistering wound, and it had had an ointment applied to it.
We just thought it was strange, you know, that he had these injuries and this sort of green ointment, which looked nothing I've seen before at all, you know. It just seemed strange and a bit unnatural, really.
Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after a shopping trip. There was no suggestion that he'd planned to disappear, and he was known as a loving family man with no obvious enemies. The autopsy confirmed that Adamski had died of a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, not least by the strange substance found on Adamski's burns.
We had the substance analysed, and the toxicologists and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was. And we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
Whatever the truth behind Adamski's death, which remains unsolved, Alan Godfrey's association with it was to turn him into a UFO celebrity. In November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey had witnessed a mysterious object whilst on patrol in Todmorden.
If I'd have got out the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone clang. That's how real it was.
Alan Godfrey was also connected to a mysterious death, which remains unsolved after almost 30 years. Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing in June 1980. His body had been found 5 days later, lying on top of a coal heap in Todmorden. At the inquest, Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, recording an open verdict and even suggesting a link with UFOs.
I did nearly 27 years in the police, and it's the one thing that I've never really got to the bottom of, and it is bizarre, and it's always been there at the back of my mind. There's just no explanation for it at all.
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to the death of Zygmunt Adamski, and the strange ointment which covered his burns has never been identified.
To this day, we don't know whether or not there actually is any connection with the Adamski death. The case is still unsolved. They've never found out how his body got onto the top of that coal heap.
Some UFO researchers looked at all the pieces of the puzzle. You know, the fact that it was put on a coal tip, and how did he get there? It's mysterious. And they just jumped to the most massive of conclusions that, you know, the only explanation must be that he's been abducted by aliens and something's gone wrong.
The Adamski story was picked up by Sunday Mirror journalist John Sheard. Although more used to covering Northern Ireland and the trial of the Yorkshire Ripper, he recognised the opportunity for an exclusive.
I sat down and tried to write it as straight as I could. I didn't want it to sound over-sensational, because it was already a very sensational story. What I didn't know was that when it hit the streets that Sunday, as the front page lead, was the incredible reaction that would happen. I'm talking about literally thousands of letters, hundreds of phone calls. I began to realise that this was a story that, even though I was still a bit iffy about it, had gripped millions of people throughout the world.
John Sheard soon discovered PC Alan Godfrey's involvement with the Adamski case, and the later claims made under hypnosis that he'd been the subject of an alien abduction.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories, but the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered. What made Alan's story so special from my point of view was the fact that A, he was a serving policeman, and one expects them to be fairly straightforward in recording facts. And of course it came on the heels of the Adamski story and a very strange inquest. Individually, they were good pieces, but when you add the two together and a possible connection, you've got dynamite.
At the time, Alan Godfrey's story captured the public imagination. Whatever the truth behind it, it's become one of Britain's classic UFO cases.
I've got no doubt that Alan's UFO experience was to him real. Whether it was objectively real is a different kettle of fish altogether. We can all have experiences which we believe are real to us, and they can happen some form of lucid dreaming, for instance, hallucinatory states, fugue states, trance states. They're all real to the person, but that's a subjective reality, not an objective reality.
On the moors above Halifax, former police officer John Porter is meeting Alan Godfrey. Both reported seeing something unexplained on the night of the 28th of November 1980.
How are you? I'm all right. You're getting grey. Hey, you still got yours, haven't you? Yeah, I know, but it's stuck on. Yeah.
It was only when I found out about you lads that it made me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because
I can understand that.
Do you know what I'm on about?
Three of us can't be wrong.
Three of you can't be wrong.
Three of us cannot be wrong. Three of us saw what we saw.
Exactly. Now, I was on my own.
Yeah.
And I've been told I would hallucinate.
I've been,
whatever.
I've had all this.
And another one. I was told I'd fallen asleep at the wheel.
Absolutely.
And I'm driving, but you know what I mean. I'm driving.
I know.
I mean, I'd only left the police station 5 minutes earlier. You know.
Alan has never changed his story. He's a very down-to-earth gentleman, and he had more to lose than to gain by relating such an incident. And that's why Alan's story goes down as a classic close encounter from the UK.
The Pennines continue to be fertile ground for strange phenomena. The numbers of reported UFO sightings are nowhere near those of the late 1970s and 80s, but they do still happen.
If you look at the number of sightings that have been reported over the years, you know, we appear to be absolutely swamped with aliens. You know, that the whole planet must be swarming with their ships as they're racing across the universe to visit us. It simply does not add up.
I have not come across a UFO that cannot be explained when you go through the various things that it possibly could be. If you know the sky, you can understand what you're seeing.
But for many who experienced their own close encounter, the passing of time hasn't diminished the impact.
I have to say, after this experience, in all honesty, I believe there's something out there other than us.
Every night at work I'm looking up, and I've never seen anything since, but you know, it is there. There's no doubt about it.
Where they come from, why they're here, I wouldn't know, but they are here.
Alan Godfrey left the police force in 1985. Almost 30 years on, he's still sticking to his story.
It's 28 years ago, and I still believe in what I saw was really there.
They've brains that work like human computers. Their description, not mine. Meet Flo and Kay next here on 5, identical twins who are also artistic savants and extraordinary people, the Rain Man twins.
on 174 with right turns and 20-mile legs.
Flight 52's troubles are about to begin. They're being diverted out over the Atlantic Ocean near Norfolk, Virginia, and placed in a holding pattern. Here, the aircraft will fly an elliptical racetrack pattern while it waits for further instructions from air traffic control. They don't know about the bad weather ahead, but with enough fuel for more than 2 hours of flying, there's no cause for alarm. This area in the northeast corridor of the United States is one of the most congested airspaces in the world. Incoming traffic from overseas is routinely directed through a pipeline of controllers before being cleared to land at one of 3 major airports in the New York area: JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Tonight, Avianca 52 will come under the direction of more than 6 controllers, each of whom is trying to get the aircraft now circling over New York safely down on the ground.
We just got off the line. It's indefinite holding at this time.
080.
We just had 3 missed approaches on 22 right. We just went below the minimums. We just had 4 misses on 22 right, which is our primary runway.
The visibility is getting worse, and it's worsening.
All right, how many are you holding? Well, we're still holding the 12 or 13 we had earlier. We're expecting some pretty lengthy delays in another hour or so.
While air traffic controllers try to cope with the increasing backlog of flights, Avianca Flight 52 circles for 19 minutes over the Virginia coast, waiting for permission to continue its journey to New York.
Avianca 052, expedite descent through level 33. Just leave flight level 330 within 3 minutes, please.
Okay, we'll leave 330 within 3 minutes. Avianca 052 Heavy.
The Avianca jet is on its way to New York at last, but they have no idea of the trouble that awaits them. Avianca Flight 52 is on its final approach to New York, unaware that conditions for landing at JFK are barely above the safe limits to land a plane. It's a pitch-black night with heavy mist, rain, and sudden violent winds.
This is Central. I was wondering how your weather was doing up there. It's pretty bad at this point. We got all sorts of wind shears and missed approaches.
Due to not seeing a runway?
You're still trying on a 30 rate? Yeah, rather unsuccessfully at this point. The winds are starting to pick up. 20% of the guys attempted approaches
went on to miss.
The plane has now almost used up the fuel planned for the journey and will shortly start eating into its reserves. The crew is considering diverting to their alternate airport in Boston, just 340 kilometers from New York.
Washington Center, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052 Heavy, go ahead.
Do you have any information about delays to Boston?
Boston, I'll check that, sir.
Thank you.
The Washington controller asks his assistant to check on the conditions at Boston, but he gets distracted juggling other aircraft and forgets all about Avianca's request. While Flight 52 is left waiting for an answer that never comes, their precious fuel supply is slowly draining away.
Ask him about Boston again.
Did you ask about delays at Boston, or are we going to approach Kennedy?
Okay, Avianca 052, it looks as though New York Center may have to hold you for possibly up to 30 minutes. You can expect clearance on course just momentarily with, stands right now, an additional holding of at most 30 minutes. With that in mind, do you want to check on an alternate airport? I believe Boston is. I'll check on Boston.
Okay. We're now descending to 190 and expecting information about Boston.
Okay, Avianca 052, I've been advised Boston is open and accepting traffic if you do need that as an alternate airport.
Okay, stand by a minute.
Flight engineer Moyano begins to calculate how much fuel they'll have after an additional 30 minutes of holding. Even before they can respond, Washington Control directs them to another holding location.
Avianca 052 Heavy, make a right turn now to intercept the Cameron 2 arrival. Cleared on course. Maintain flight level 190.
Flight 52 is now off the New Jersey coast in an area known as Cameron, less than 72 kilometers from Kennedy Airport, but it seems as far away as ever.
During all those holding times, I was praying and trying to see where we're going to land. I mean, when we're going to be on the ground. I don't want to be here anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I apologize for the delay, but it appears we're going to be holding as we wait our turn to land in New York. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, and we should have you on the ground shortly. Thank you.
There was a point where the captain announced that there was traffic in the New York City area, and that we would be on hold for a while, and that he would get back to us.
It will be the last communication the crew has with the passengers. Flight 52's situation now goes from bad to worse.
Avianca 052, descend and maintain 14,000.
It's handed over to the New York controllers, who even on a good day can be intimidating. And today is not a good day. There are up to 39 aircraft trying to land and dozens more on the ground waiting to take off.
Avianca 052, expect for the clearance at 0139.
Avianca 052 Heavy, roger.
Tired and frustrated, the crew of Avianca 52 continues to circle the crowded airspace over New York while they wait for clearance to land. After more than 5 hours in the air, Luis Montoya is anxious to get his wife and 2 young daughters on the ground and back to their home in Queens.
As the flight started to prolong, we started to feel uneasy. My wife was carrying the baby at all times, and we were wondering what could be happening. After all, they weren't giving us any information, and most people began to feel nervous.
New York Center finally gives the crew of Avianca 52 the message they've been waiting for.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Avianca Kennedy is 2,400 feet. Can you accept an approach?
That's an affirmative, sir.
They think they're finally in the clear. Then, calamity. The foul weather and zero visibility forces several aircraft just ahead of them to abandon their landing attempts and make a second attempt. The controllers have bad news for the Colombian airliner.
Avianca 052. Continue to the left, heading 230 vectors, holding at Cameron again.
Another hold.
Okay, 230 vectors for holding at Cameron. Kennedy, Avianca 052.
Avianca 052, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. You have any estimates, sir?
Avianca 052 Heavy, I might be able to get you in right now. Stand by.
Thank you.
The crew wait silently and hope. But when the reply comes, it's more bad news.
Avianca 052, we just got off the line. It's indefinite holding at this time. The Avianca 052, turn left, heading 090, hold at Cameron, maintain 1000.
They've been held up for 48 minutes on the way here. Now they've been circling around for another 25 minutes, only a few miles from the safety of JFK Airport.
They were progressively moving toward JFK, and they were held in the air for 3 times. This certainly would put some stress on the crew as to the fact they want to go from A to B. They don't want to fly in a racetrack for an hour just holding.
At 8:55, the cockpit voice recorder begins recording the last 40 minutes of Flight 52. The crew at this stage seem resigned, or are perhaps too timid to complain. Moments later, Avianca is given more unwelcome news.
Avianca 052, expect further clearance time 0205. Expect further clearance in 20 minutes.
It's now that the stress level in the cockpit begins to rise.
0205. Well, I think we need priority. We are passing out of fuel.
Avianca 052, roger. How long can you hold and what is your alternate?
Okay, stand by a minute.
The flight engineer quickly calculates the remaining fuel.
Yes, sir, I will be able to hold for 5 minutes. That's all we can do.
Avianca 052, roger. And what's your alternate?
We said Boston.
But it's full of traffic, I think.
Avianca 052, say alternate again.
It was Boston, but we can't do it now. We'll run out of fuel.
Avianca 052, cleared to land at Kennedy via heading 040, maintain 1000 at speed 180.
The Avianca crew, when they felt that they were being handed off to an approach controller now and given a heading and a lower altitude, I'm sure in their minds they thought, well, they even commented on the cockpit voice recorder, we're being handled or we're being taken care of.
It's okay if I send 4 more your way?
Casino, I'm back in the hold again. I got 4 in the stack and there's no end in sight. I can't keep you times. I'd be guessing if I did. This guy's killing me. Avianca 052 only has 5 more minutes in the hold. You gonna be able to take him or I'll set him up to his alternate?
What is his speed now?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Holding speed.
Slow him to 180 and I'll take him.
Say again?
Slow him to 180 knots and I'll take him. You guys holding a lot?
Man, we're holding all up and down the coast.
Ah, that's good practice, man.
But in this critical handoff from one controller to the next, there is no specific mention of Avianca's critically low fuel.
Nobody told the next controller that. So the next controller, when Avianca came in on the frequency, the controller just said, right, I've got you, proceed to Kennedy, or I'm going to put you in a hold, and put him in a holding pattern over the last approach fix. The options were gone. Now the aircraft could only get into Kennedy.
Avianca, descend and maintain 7,000.
Descending to 7,000, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052, before you go, there is a wind shear alert
On final at 1,500 feet.
Turn left, heading 090.
Left, heading 090, Avianca 052 Heavy.
The high-level wind shear was passed on early on, so he was aware of that. But the low-level wind shear below 500 feet was not passed on.
After more than an hour and 17 minutes waiting for clearance to land, the crew of Flight 52 believe controllers on the ground are at last aware of their fuel emergency and are clearing the 707 for a priority landing. In the cabin, the flight attendants and passengers have no idea that their plane is dangerously low on fuel.
Then the go-around procedure is stating that the power be applied slowly.
In the cockpit, the crew now hastily discuss the go-around procedure, what the manual says they must do if they can't find the runway through the fog and low clouds and have to go around a second time. It's standard procedure.
Power be applied slowly and to avoid rapid accelerations and to have a minimum of nose-up attitude.
To maintain what? Minimum nose-up attitude. That means...
Flight engineer Moyano is concerned that if the captain were to pull up the plane's nose too sharply, all the remaining fuel would slosh to the back of the tank, causing engines to stop.
Covered on fuel during the go-around. What it means is it doesn't contain fuel for feeding itself and a flameout could occur. And it is necessary to lower the nose again.
Right now we are proceeding to the airport inbound. We have 17 miles.
Roger.
This means we'll have hamburger tonight.
Avianca, descend and maintain 3,000.
Descend and maintain 3,000. Avianca 052 Heavy.
3,000 feet. They got us. They're already vectoring us.
No, they are descending us.
They are giving us priority.
Avianca 052 Heavy, contact Kennedy Tower 119.1. Good day.
Only minutes before landing, Flight 52 is handed off to a JFK tower controller whose shift is about to end.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Kennedy Tower 22 left. You are number 3 following 727 traffic on a 9-mile final.
Avianca 052
Heavy, roger.
Can I lower the landing gear yet?
No, I think it's too early. If we lower the landing gear, we have to maintain a very high nose attitude.
So desperately low is their fuel that the first officer wants to delay putting down the landing gear, which will increase the aircraft's drag, requiring more power and using more of what little fuel they have remaining.
I was so happy. For me, it was like a joy. I mean, we're going to land soon and this is going to be end.
Avianca 052, what is your airspeed?
Avianca 052, 140 knots.
Avianca 052, can you increase your airspeed 10 knots?
10?
Okay, 10 knots, increasing.
Increase.
10 knots more.
Tell me things louder because I'm not hearing it. Lower the gear.
Gear down.
Avianca
052, 22 left, wind 190 at 20, cleared to land.
Clear to land, Avianca 052 Heavy. Wind check, please.
190 at 20.
With the weather deteriorating and flying on fumes, the crew of Flight 52 will have only one chance of getting their 149 passengers safely on the ground.
Avianca 052, say airspeed.
145 knots.
Are we cleared to land now?
Yes, sir, we are clear to land.
Stand by. Flaps 50. Landing checklist complete.
It was extremely important that Avianca 52 landed on their first approach, JFK. The voice recorder revealed that the captain was certainly quite concerned about the fuel state, and he was talking aggressively with the first officer, putting out flaps, getting the airplane configured.
It was time for the flight engineer to say, this is the only approach we're going to be able to make, and he didn't.
Give me 50.
Flaps 50 now.
All set for landing.
Standing by for lights. Slightly below glide slope. 1,000 feet above field. Instruments cross-checked, slightly below.
Stand by for lights.
Stand by.
The wind is slightly from the left, 190 to 20. Below glide slope.
With about 10 minutes of fuel remaining, and nearly 4 kilometers from the runway, Flight 52 finds itself flying into violent wind shear, forcing them to slow the plane down.
They were getting like 60 knots of wind on the nose, and then as they descended on down through about 500 feet to the ground, they were down to 20 knots. So that's 40 knot change and 1,000 feet of elevation. That's a lot.
This is the wind shear.
Now the wind changes direction. It's pressing them down towards the ground.
Glide slope!
Glide slope.
Sink rate
Glide
500
slope.
feet.
Glide slope.
The captain desperately searches for the runway, but it's shrouded in low clouds and fog.
Terrain.
Lights!
The runway, where is it?
I don't see it. I don't see it.
The plane's warning system is telling them that they're about to crash.
Pull up.
Glide slope! Sink rate 500 feet.
Just 4 kilometers from touchdown, Flight 52 has been caught in violent wind shear. To save the plane, Captain Caviedes applies full throttle, burning up more of the plane's precious fuel.
Give me the landing gear up, landing gear up!
The airplane was about 200 feet above the ground, about 2 miles from the runway, which was well below the glide slope and very dangerous. So the airplane almost crashed on its first approach.
When you get a missed approach, now it changes the whole ball game.
Request another traffic pattern.
Executing a missed approach. Avianca 052 Heavy.
The operation of pulling the plane up in the missed approach was a very violent one.
I don't know what happened with the runway. I didn't see it.
I didn't see it either.
I didn't see it.
Avianca 052, you were making a left turn, correct, sir?
Tell him we are in emergency.
2,000 feet. That's right, to 180 on
The heading, and we'll try once again. We are running out of fuel.
Okay.
What did he say?
I already advised him that we are going to attempt again.
Advise him we are in emergency. Do you tell him?
Yes, sir, I already advised him.
But the tower controller, at the end of his shift, transfers Avianca 52 to his counterpart in approach control. They'll have to begin all over again.
Contact approach on 118.4.
Approach, Avianca 052 Heavy. We just missed a missed approach and we are maintaining 2,000.
Flaps 14.
Avianca 052 Heavy, New York. Good evening. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Advise him we don't have fuel.
Climb and maintain 3,000. We are running out of fuel, sir.
Okay, fly heading 080.
Did you already advise him we don't have fuel?
Yes, sir, I already advised him. We are going to maintain 3,000 and he's going to get us back.
As they get back in the pattern and circle the field and come back in again. That again adds to the traffic jam that was being created at Kennedy Airport.
Avianca 052 Heavy,
I'm going to turn you about 15 miles northeast and then bring you back onto the approach. Is that okay with you and your fuel?
What did he say?
The guy is angry.
I guess so. Thank you very much.
These guys were out, and they didn't say we were out. And he allowed the approach control to vector them way out in the original pattern and 15 miles north of the outer marker again.
Flight 52 is instructed to fly a long approach pattern for another landing attempt. The plane is down to its last dregs of fuel as the crew waits for final clearance from ground controllers.
And then they were run way out towards Long Island and vectored all around, which was equivalent to holding for another 15-20 minutes.
Did you get clearance yet?
Can you give us a final yet? Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052.
Affirmative, sir. Turn left, heading 040. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Negative, sir. We are running out of fuel.
Okay, turn left, heading 310, sir.
Set flaps 14.
Okay, and you're number 2 for the
Approach. I just have to give you enough room so you can make it without
having to come out again.
Okay. We're number 2 and flying 360 now.
Avianca 052 Heavy, turn left, heading 330.
The lights in the aircraft start to flicker, a sign that the engines are being starved of fuel.
330 on the heading, Avianca 052.
Once there's no fuel flowing through the pump out of the tank, an amber light comes on to tell you that tank is empty.
Flame out! Flame out on engine number 4!
Flame out on it!
Flame out on engine number 3!
Over the runway.
The passengers can hear the sound of the engines beginning to shut down.
When the engines went off, I looked over to the lady that was sitting next to me, and I asked her to give me her hand. And I philosophically accepted, I might die here. This is it.
Avianca 052, we just lost 2 engines, and we need priority, please.
Avianca 052.
Turn left, heading 250. Intercept the localizer.
250, roger.
Select the ILS.
ILS.
Avianca 052, you're
5 miles from the outer marker. Maintain 2,000 until established in the localizer. Cleared for ILS 22 left.
Roger, Avianca.
You select the ILS.
It's ready on 2.
When all the engines flame out and the generators fall off the line, a considerable amount of power is lost, electrical power is lost.
In the cabin, the screams, the crying, and then this terrible sound of the wind against the fuselage as the plane drops from the sky.
Avianca 052, radar contact lost.
Avianca's missing due to the weather thing.
Yeah, Avianca 52 lost an engine. We're
Trying to find out why.
Yeah, we're no longer talking to Avianca. He's 15 northeast of Kennedy.
Ah, wonderful.
At Clipper 18, turn left, heading 180.
6.5 hours after leaving Colombia, Avianca Flight 52 is missing somewhere over New York.
Yes, hello. I live in Cove Neck in Oyster Bay, and there is a plane crashed in our yard in front of our house.
When I woke up, the first thing that I did, I put my hand over here in my back, and I was bleeding. I said, "Oh my God, we crashed."
Both my legs were broken, and I had, blood all over the place.
El asiento en el que estaba sentada la hija mía, sí recuerdo que estaba.
The seat where my daughter was sitting was totally destroyed by pieces of steel that happened to have come from the wing.
Pedazos de hierro que entraron del ala y lo.
I found my baby Daniela amongst the pieces of a torn-up, twisted chair. And I picked her up like this, and she was drenched in blood.
Bañada en sangre.
Avianca Flight 52 has crashed on Long Island, New York, less than 28 kilometers from JFK Airport. From deep in the woods, medical technician Bob O'Brien can hear the survivors before he can see the shattered 707.
What I first heard was it were just some people who were crying in pain, but it was apparent immediately what had happened when the plane hit the mountain and just stopped dead.
It just fell out of the sky. That's how witnesses describe the crash of Avianca Flight 52. A strangely silent crash.
There was not a big fire here. That will make it easier for investigators to examine if there were any gas or engine problems.
There have been reports of lightning in the area just before the plane went down.
The spokesman for the controllers union says that Kennedy is critically understaffed, a problem that is compounded by bad weather.
Rescuers have not yet given up on finding more victims.
Lo primero que me acuerdo es que yo miro y
First thing I remember is that I looked up and I saw a priest. He was praying for me and I was lying down on the ground. Right above us, I saw 3 or 4 helicopters flying over us.
3 o 4 helicópteros volando encima mío.
I managed to get up on top of the fuselage, and there's that door handle that says, in case of emergency, pull here. So I pulled that door handle, and that door handle just went, and the door came open about 4 inches. And then I was able to flip that over, and I could just see piles and piles of people strapped in their seats.
The extreme G-force of the crash has broken off the cockpit and catapulted it through a stand of trees and into the deck of a home some 30 meters from the impact site.
Come on, somebody get the back here.
And I saw some cables, and I saw a big hole in the fuselage over the passengers that were sitting next to me who were kind of unconscious.
And on top of me was this guy who was bleeding, and big guy, I don't know who he was, but he was on top of me, but I was sitting.
I pulled myself with those cables towards that hole, which was over the wing.
I started screaming, hey, help me out, help me, take me out of here. And then somebody, when they realized that I was alive, they removed they took away the guy who was on top of me, and they took me out of the airplane.
At that moment, a fireman was climbing on the wing, and he saw me, and he said, there's a guy here, and he pulled me out.
37 fire and rescue companies from Nassau County are quickly mobilized. The rescue is the largest pre-9/11 operation of its kind in the New York area.
That little girl was sitting up on the fuselage and she was crying, mi madre, mi madre. And that imprint of horror just was, you just in your mind's eye focus right back in on, I saw mi madre, I saw her mother, and I know what that little girl was seeing. It was horrible enough for me, and I'm a professional rescuer.
I realized that my baby was dying, so I began to scream.
Please help me. I had the baby here, please.
The plane has crashed in the wealthy neighborhood of Cove Neck, near the home of the father of tennis star John McEnroe. Medics set up a makeshift triage unit on his lawn. When daylight breaks 10 hours later, 85 survivors have been pulled from the wreck. The lead flight attendant is the only member of crew to survive the crash. Of the 11 babies on board Flight 52, all but one are found alive. Bob O'Brien scours the tail section for survivors and finds FAA investigators struggling to remove the aircraft's black boxes.
I grabbed the handle and just pulled the whole box out and took that out and brought that out the door and gave it to them.
Even as people are being pulled from the wreckage, the on-site investigation begins. In charge on the ground is Barry Trotter of the National Transportation Safety Board. A former airline pilot, Trotter became an investigator after losing his right arm in a motorcycle accident.
The condition of the aircraft was really astonishing to see that much of the structure was left in the condition that it was in.
Unaware of the details of Avianca's troubled flight, investigators quickly find a valuable piece of evidence,
you could look at the engines right away and you could tell the engines were not turning. So there was no power on the engines. That was the first big clue.
Trotter and his team examine the fuel tanks and find just a few gallons of jet fuel still on board. It becomes clear why the 707's engines stopped turning, but the question of who's to blame is still to be answered. In the community of Cove Neck, New York, salvage workers begin the task of dismantling the shattered remains of Avianca Flight 52.